Hello, and welcome to a new video. Today I'm going to be responding to Patrick Williams' Shut Up About Plot Holes. This is a bit different than the usual video I tend to respond to. Normally I respond to stuff concerning transhumanism, but I found this video to be particularly stupid and the antithesis of what you should follow as an artist in general. And I felt it would be a decent idea and maybe a bit of fun to try to tear it apart. So let's begin.
Okay guys, we gotta talk about plot holes. Used to be this thing that only existed in super nerdy movie conversations. Like, hey, how did Indiana Jones survive clinging to the outside of that submarine? But over the past 15 years, they've become pervasive, spreading through online movie conversations.
People have been pointing out bad writing in movies as long as movies has existed. The only reason that you hear more about plot holes is because the term has spread so far and wide, and because the internet allows far more opinions to be presented than ever before. And in fact, later in the video, you even sort of mention this.
Everywhere you turn, people are complaining about
biggest plot holes.
Plot holes.
All the plot holes.
Plot holes.
So full of plot holes. Plot holes.
Naruto plot holes.
So many plot holes.
Plot holes and maybe plot holes.
So yeah, it's a common error when it comes to writing movies or video games or books or anything with a story for that matter. You're just showing people saying plot holes, but are they right about it? Do they have a point in it?
Back in April, when A Quiet Place opened, my Twitter and Facebook feeds were filled with people complaining about all the plot holes. I saw one guy say he'd made a list of 41 plot holes in that movie. But here's the thing. No one seems to actually know what a plot hole is.
So you mean to tell me that all of these people you just showed saying plot holes, none of them know what a plot hole actually is? None of them use the term correctly? None of them have even an inkling of an idea of what sort of mistakes could be made in writing to correctly judge what is and is not a plot hole?
And all those plot holes people complain about, they don't actually matter.
And this is why I hate this video so much. This guy basically looks at this sort of error when it comes to writing stories and says, it doesn't matter. The people whining about it are a bunch of nerds. It doesn't actually matter. You should just ignore it. You should just ignore plot holes because it doesn't matter. Could you imagine anyone who seriously takes an interest in the arts saying that poor quality doesn't matter?
What is a plot hole? People's definitions vary, but here's the generally accepted one that I use. A plot hole is a point in which a story breaks a previously established rule about its own universe. Basically, it's when a story contradicts itself. Okay, so here's what are not plot holes.
In The Dark Knight Rises, we never see how Batman gets back to Gotham City. That's a plot hole.
You see, it's funny because he punched the guy who said something he didn't like. Please laugh. Please.
One of the earliest cinematic developments was the concept of montage. The idea is that when two images are presented in sequence, the audience understands that they occur chronologically and will mentally fill in the time between scenes. So for instance, if a person is in one location and the next scene they're in another location, we understand that in between scenes they traveled between the locations. Movies tend to assume that the audience is reasonably intelligent, but I guess they're wrong.
However, the problem with The Dark Knight Rises is that the situation Bruce Wayne was in warrants an explanation for how he got to the next situation. In the scene he's talking about is after Bruce Wayne climbed out of that hole that Bane trapped him in. His body is still completely broken from the beating Spain gave him. He lost all of his money. Gotham City is in complete lockdown, and he's trapped in, I think, India with basically nothing on him, no means to communicate with the outside world. And in the very next scene, he's in Gotham, he's all healed up, he seems to have gotten his finances in order, and he's ready to take on Bane. That's a pretty severe difference, and do you know what could have actually helped piece together or, fix this discrepancy? A montage, which is literally what you just mentioned. You literally mentioned the solution to the problem that guy brought up in your own video. Show Bruce Wayne getting access to a phone, calling up a favor from Alfred or one of his associates he maybe talked about or talked to earlier in the film. Just write that in. And then you can reasonably assume a few extra steps along the way, but it's not going to be as egregious. So what exactly is wrong with wanting an explanation for something as extraordinary as being physically debilitated, completely broke, and having to sneak into a lockdown city? What's the problem with wanting an explanation for that?
If movies showed us every single second that happened during the span of the story, they would be 40 hours long and really f***ing boring.
Gee, if only there was some movie-making magic that could crunch together an extended period of time into a select few clips, like, I don't know, a montage.
There are so many plot holes in A Quiet Place. Oh, it's such a great movie. I mean, like, why did they decide to have a baby? And why didn't they just move to the waterfall?
Those are both very poignant questions. Why did the couple decide to have a baby, of all things, when there's these alien monsters patrolling the area they live in that react to sound? Have you ever been near a baby, Patrick? Have you ever been aware of just how fucking loud they are? And why don't they move to the waterfall? If the film established they can scream all they want, make any noise they want near the waterfall, and the aliens won't hear them, why doesn't the movie provide an explanation for why they don't move? It could literally be done in a conversation. They could say that it would be too difficult to pack everything up and move over to the waterfall. They could say that a waterfall is a very poor place to live due to all the moisture around it that makes it hard on building materials. They could even have the father of the family have some sort of human element to him and say, I don't want to move to the waterfall because I don't want to give up what little of a normal life I have in this house that we currently live in, that we have left. I don't want to give that up, even for safety. All of those would have been completely fine explanations. You might think he's an idiot for the last one, but it would be an explanation. But no, just punch him. He said a bad thing about a movie you like. Just beat his ass.
This is the one that really drives me nuts. Movies are, for the most part, about human beings, or at least characters who think and act like human beings. And you know what human beings are not? Logical. People are impulsive. They make choices based on emotion. Not everyone thinks exactly the same. And also, people make mistakes.
Characters making mistakes and acting illogically aren't both required for things to go wrong or for a plot to be set up. A character can act completely logically, they can think with their head, they can be very rational in their decisions, and things can still go completely wrong. The fact of the matter is that person's complaint was never addressed in the film, even though the characters would have had plenty of time to consider it. The characters knew about the waterfall, so they should at least try. They should at least try to solve that issue, or at least solve it for the audience. And of course the characters knew the aliens were attracted to sound, so there's really no good fucking reason for them to have a baby.
You know how in Star Trek, Vulcans live dominated by logic, and it's established that acting logically is at odds with acting human. So if
Acting only logical is at odds with acting human. The other characters of Star Trek act logical all the time, but they aren't limited to only acting logically. And there's plenty of times when their logical ideas don't always work out.
everyone acted totally logically all the time, only making the most logical decision in any situation, no one would be acting human.
I notice that no one is actually asking for every character to act 100% logically in A Quiet Place or any other movie for that matter, but instead would like for the characters not to make complete bonehead decisions.
Thus, there would be no conflict, which would lead to no drama, which would lead to no stories.
That's not true in the slightest. You can have plenty of drama in a situation where characters act logically. For example, in the film The Thing, understanding that the aliens' biology is different and thus their blood would be different, the characters all gathered around and gave samples of their blood for one of the characters to test out to see who is and isn't an alien. That's a completely logical approach that came with a huge amount of tension because we understand that somewhere in that room is the alien and it's only a matter of time before it's found out. In A Quiet Place even, the characters apply plenty of logic to their situation. They cover whatever tracks or trails they have with sand to make little noise. They barricade their basement with mattresses to muffle any noise. Whenever they do make noise, willingly, they go over to the waterfall so the aliens don't hear them. They have firework systems in order to make a ton of noise everywhere and distract the aliens in case someone in the house makes any noise and attracts them. Those are all logical approaches to the problem, so that makes it all the more confusing that the people who wrote the film didn't account for any of the illogical aspects of the premise and the actions the characters take.
And movies would be really f***ing boring.
There is a huge plot hole in Star Wars. I mean, come on. Why would the Death Star have such an obvious design flaw?
Evidently it was a huge plot hole since an entire movie was made to answer that single question. That's literally why the film Rogue One exists, to answer why is there this single small hole in the Death Star that if you shoot into it causes the whole thing to blow up. And the answer is, it was an intentional design flaw by an unwilling engineer of the Death Star, hoping that the rebels will get the plans and be able to find it and be able to utilize the intentional flaw. Sure, it was a retroactive fix. Star Wars Episode 4 came out before Rogue One, but evidently even the people at Disney and Lucasfilm cared enough about that issue to dedicate all that time and money and resources to answering it. So why are you just punching a guy for a perfectly reasonable question that mega corporations want to answer as well?
Okay, some of these can be valid complaints. Sometimes there's a story development that's a little too convenient. Like in the 2009 Star Trek, Kirk just happens to get stranded on the same planet as old Spock and they end up in the same cave together so Spock can explain what's going on. I like the movie, but that's a little contrived and lazy. But it's not a plot hole.
You might notice by now he's talking about things that aren't plot holes, but not actually explaining why plot holes don't matter. Why should we shut up about plot holes, given how many things are apparently plot holes in movies? Why don't they matter?
I mean, how does Benicio del Toro know the rebels' plans? Nobody told him. That's a plot hole.
At least 50% of the plot holes that I see people complain about are things that are actually explained in the movie if you just pay attention. Like that one in The Last Jedi, there's a scene where you see DJ listening as Poe tells Finn and Rose the Resistance's plan. But I guess if you're too busy live tweeting about plot holes, you can miss some stuff.
That's a pretty bold percentage there. I find kind of funny that you decide to harp on like the one not actual plot hole in The Last Jedi. I mean, given just how poorly written that movie is, are you really surprised that people might make a mistake or two with their analysis of it? Every fucking frame has some plot hole, some inconsistency, some error, or just some general aspect of bad writing, and you're surprised when a single fucking plot hole in the film isn't actually a plot hole and was actually explained beforehand. He isn't going to actually go over any real reason why the other plot holes in the film aren't actually plot holes. Just watch.
If you want, you can find plot holes anywhere. They're all over your favorite movies. In Lord of the Rings, the Eagles could have just flown the ring to Mount Doom and saved everyone all that trouble. In Toy Story, why does Buzz freeze like the other toys when he thinks he's a real person? In Ocean...
That's actually a good question. Why does Buzz freeze up when actual people are there playing with him? Considering that Woody has shown you can move around and interact when there's real people near you, it almost would have been a better fix if they removed that scene with Woody and Sid later on in the movie, where Woody, comes to life when a kid is around, and that would have solved the whole issue. Or if he, had an explanation for it in the film.
11, how did they get the flyers into the vault? In Cinderella, why does the glass slipper stay when everything else disappears? In Alien, if the acid can melt through the floor, why doesn't it melt through the entire ship?
That's not a plot hole because we understand that acid dissipates over time and the Nostromo is ginormous. It's not some rinky-dink little dinghy, but like a massive spaceship with multiple floors. So the acid doesn't dissipate through all of the floors, but it does dissipate through quite a few, which is why the characters realize, oh shit, we can't just shoot this thing in the face or cut it up or anything else because it's acid will cause a hull breach eventually. I mean, that's not even inconsistent with any other part of the movie, which was literally your definition of a plot hole. How is it a plot hole, actually? How do you justify calling that a plot hole based on your own definition?
In Gremlins, what does after midnight technically mean? Isn't it always after midnight? How does that rule make any sense?
And that is also a good question. If they specified maybe a time period, you can't do it after 12, but, after 6 when it's breakfast time, or 7 or 8, then you can feed them.
In Star Wars, why does the Death Star have a trash compactor when they can just jettison the trash into space?
Because the area they are in might not be right next to the outer walls of the Death Star, and it might be more efficient to compress the trash into neat cubes or slabs, sort of like in WALL-E actually, if you think about it, and then transport the trash over to wherever they jettison it into space. Or maybe they're recycling it, or maybe they're doing something else with it. But again, that's not a plot hole by your own definition. It's not inconsistent with any other established part of Star Wars. In fact, we don't even see the Death Star jettison anything into space. For all we know, they could be extremely efficient recyclers and reuse absolutely every bit of trash and waste they have on board.
Look, if you want to watch stuff this way, you can even find plot holes in this video. Why am I wearing sunglasses if I'm inside?
Those don't even remotely look like sunglasses.
I'm indoors in one shot and outdoors in the next.
We know what editing is, buddy. You're not fooling anyone.
But we never see me go outside. Plot hole. You can find plot holes or...
Do you know who this guy's favorite Batman villain is? The Scarecrow, because he just loves his straw man.
logic gaps in any movie. And if you want to, go right ahead. Just don't tell me that those are genuine flaws and problems and reasons that a movie is bad.
Logical inconsistencies are evidence of bad writing. Now, some plot holes are far more minor than others. The scene where Holdo goes into hyperspace in The Last Jedi and slams through the supremacy is a major plot hole, because then you have to question why no one else in the whole history of Star Wars decided to do exactly that during all the battles and all the wars that have gone on, if it's that easy. While the plot hole you mentioned, like Cinderella's shoe doesn't disappear with everything else, is quite minor, because there's at least a little bit of an explanation you can come up with on the fly that doesn't require you to whisk the script away from the director and screenwriter and start writing stuff in yourself in order to, fit things all nice and neat in the film. I mean, that's sort of like an objective issue with the film. It's not a personal opinion or a subjective view, but hey, there's like a genuine inconsistency with the writing. Now, you can like the film all you want. There's plenty of bad movies out there that are enjoyable to sit down and watch because of qualities beyond their writing, or maybe even just a good laugh at the expense of the writing. But you have to, if you do take the art of film seriously, plot holes should be something that bothers you when you watch a movie.
Because they're not. None of these things actually matter.
Could you imagine any of the greats of movie making having this attitude? Could you imagine Orson Welles or Stanley Kubrick, Alfred Hitchcock, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, any of the people who brought film to life and inspired generations of people with this magic and art of movie making, saying, good writing? Oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the plot is consistent internally. It doesn't matter if there's any logic to what the characters do. It doesn't matter. Who cares? Just throw some flashy shit on the screen and the audience will sit down and clap and laugh and giggle. Who fucking cares about quality, right? Who gives a shit? Now, I'm not making movies, but I am writing a book, a science fiction story, and I can tell you right now that I actually give a shit about internal consistency. I consider what happens at the beginning of the story, what happens in the middle, what happens in the end. Are there any loose ties that I'm aware of? Are there any things that need to be rewritten or changed to fit what happens later on in the story? Is what's going on in this part of the story consistent with what happened earlier? That's something to give a shit about when you're making a story. When you're telling a fucking tale, you have to be aware of inconsistencies that could crop up and do your best to avoid them. But this guy here just doesn't care. He doesn't give a shit. I mean, it's like what Gordon Ramsay complains about all the bad chefs he comes across. They don't give a shit about the art. They just want to put out whatever schlock they can think of on the fly, not have any quality control, not employ any skill in it. It's pure fucking... It's the antithesis of art. It's the antithesis of good storytelling, and it's reprehensible. As someone who genuinely enjoys art, be it movies, or cinema, or video games, or hell, any art that even doesn't necessarily have a story, like paintings or sculptures or music, I believe quality should be a major factor. Truly, I hope no one who is working on any movie or any story listens even for a second to what this guy has to say.
Because they're not what a movie is about.
Movies are stories, and therefore they need to be internally consistent, and therefore should have as little plot holes as possible. That's something the people who are writing these films should be aware of and try to account for.
So even though most people are using the term plot hole incorrectly, all of these complaints are rooted in the same thing. But movies aren't about logic. They're not equations.
There's an alien on board the Nostromo, and it's been picking off the crew one by one. Every attempt at attacking the alien directly has been futile, and yet the Nostromo not only has an escape vessel, but also has a self-destruct mechanism. What's the logical thing Ellen Ripley is going to do? Will she either run around the ship with her fists in the air, ready to punch the alien to death? Or will she try to prime the self-destruct system, get to the escape pod, and fly away, while the rest of the ship blows up and presumably the alien with it? One of them is logical, one of them is not. The very fact you're now arguing against logic, as I think Mueller pointed out in his response to this, is a telltale sign that you've already lost. Like, when you're arguing against logic itself, where do you go? At what point do you realize, maybe my opinions aren't correct? Maybe I have an objectively incorrect view of the situation, and I should stop, sit down, reassess, and seriously consider that I may be wrong. Because this whole it doesn't have to be logical, fucking smacks of the kind of shit that creationists and spiritualists and all these woo peddlers say whenever someone points out that their ideas and beliefs aren't scientifically backed. They say, science can't account for everything, as they make claims about the natural universe that science very much can account for.
Proofs, they're not puzzles. Movies are not math. Remember that guy in your freshman dorm who would always try to guess the endings of movies so that he could prove that he was smarter than the people who made them? Well, now everyone is turning into that guy. On the site movieplotholes.com, there are 7 plot holes listed for Die Hard. The first one says that the villain's plan is to stage a hostage situation so that the police will shut down power to the building, allowing them to access the vault. But since they would have already had detailed plans of the building, they could have just shut down power themselves, making the whole thing more simple. Now,
well, that is a plot hole, unless there's a reasonable explanation in the film, or one that can be reasonably deduced based on the situation without outright rewriting the script that would account for it. A lot of people would still argue that Die Hard is still an excellent film of impeccable quality despite that plot hole, because people are able to take a much more nuanced and reasonable opinion or view of this stuff than you are. It's almost a labor of appreciation to go through these films that are highly rated and are highly regarded and try your best to find a plot hole because the film was so good you didn't catch them the first time. They managed to immerse you enough that even with your brain turned on, you weren't able to quite catch it because you were so invested in following along with it. That's as opposed to a labor of disdain like finding the plot holes in The Last Jedi, or Quiet Place, or Birdemic, or whatever, where you just want to point out all the stupid inconsistencies the film has with its own universe, or any previous film in the intellectual property or the series.
I know it seems impossible to watch movies wrong, but you're watching movies wrong.
There is nothing wrong about watching a movie with a critical eye. There's literally jobs based on that. They're called movie reviewers, and they've been around for as long as movies have existed. People want a good film, and there are objective metrics in order to determine that, on top of the personal opinions and biases of the viewer.
Die Hard is a movie about an ordinary man thrown into an impossible situation, who needs to rise to the occasion and persevere so that he can reunite with his estranged wife. That's the point of the movie. That's what it's about.
That doesn't mean there aren't plot holes, nor that it's not worthwhile to point them out, you swarmy smug fuck.
Most of the other plot holes for Die Hard listed on the site are variations on, why didn't John McClane do this? Well, because the whole point of John McClane is that he's a normal guy who makes human mistakes.
Aren't the people who are making this list also normal people who are also prone to making mistakes, and yet they're able to sit down and point out or ask why he didn't do something?
If he did the perfect, most logical thing every single time, he wouldn't be the same character. He'd basically be a Vulcan, and the movie would end way earlier and be terrible.
I'd like to take a moment to point out this guy's cinematography fucking sucks. The amount of egregious lens flare in that clip alone is absolutely horrifying. But, maybe also complaining about the visuals of a movie is watching it wrong. Maybe visuals don't matter either.
Take Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. At the climax of the story, Harry reaches the Triwizard Cup, which turns out to have been turned into a portkey that transports him to Voldemort. So the villain's whole plan hinged on Harry being the one to get to the cup first and win the tournament. But really, any random object could have been turned into a portkey, and they could have sent him to Voldemort way earlier without all that hassle.
However, any random object would also be likely to send anyone else to Voldemort before Harry even knows that object exists. Voldemort could set up something to be the teleporting object, and he gets like Joe Schmo Jingle Jangles, a preteen wizard who just joined the school rather than Harry Potter. But by making the prize of this tournament that Harry is in, the teleporting thing, and there being a bunch of people invested in Harry winning, and Harry showing himself to be an adept wizard in his own right, who is very well capable of winning, that actually maximizes the odds that it would be Harry and not anyone else who gets teleported to Voldemort. You see what I did there? I took your plot hole, and I came up with a reasonable explanation for it. Because sometimes, as you've pointed out, not everything is actually a plot hole, or not every plot hole is so egregious it ruins a movie and is super indicative of bad writing. You can come up with an argument for why something isn't a plot hole. So why don't you do that rather than claim that people who are pointing out plot holes are just watching the movies wrong?
But that doesn't matter. We're so invested in Harry trying to figure out a way to win, and then so surprised by the reveal of the portkey and Voldemort returning, that to pick apart the logic of the villain's plan would mean totally disengaging from the story. This, like so many plot holes, are things that would just destroy any conflict or drama and end the story immediately.
So what if there are plot holes that are so egregious it prevents you from being invested in the story, which is what a lot of plot holes that people point out in films, especially bad films, do. That's why they point out the plot holes, dude. It's because it ruins their movie viewing experience. Regardless of how human the characters are and how illogical they act, plot holes are going to make you sit there and say, hold on. Just hold on, man. Wait, why did they... But didn't the movie already establish... and so on and so forth? It's almost as if the quality of the writing is important, isn't it?
Like, sure, to an objective, omniscient viewer, it would make logical sense for Admiral Holdo to tell Poe Dameron her plan.
It would make sense in-universe for her to tell Poe or anyone else her plan. The reason a mutiny even started on her ship was because everyone thought she was just stranding them without a plan, biding time until they die. If she had told Poe or anyone else, "No, don't worry, I have an idea," especially after Poe directly asks her. He never asks, "What's your plan?" He asks, "Do you have a plan?" And she says nothing. Why did she say nothing? Why didn't she say, "Yes, I know what to do," or "Yes, I understand, the situation," and have a course of action in mind? It's not like there's a whole slew of resistance members or rebels or whatever you call themselves at that point out throughout the galaxy waiting to help them out or anything. It was pretty much that's it on that single ship that she and Poe was on, and they were in the sights of the First Order, pretty much sitting ducks, all things considered. Her saying, "Yeah, I have a plan," would make a lot of sense in universe as well as our own outside Epimetheum observations.
And then there would be no conflict and no drama. Poe would never send Finn on a mission, and Finn would never grow, and Poe would never grow, and there would be no story.
The fact that the conflict and the drama has to stem from such a stupid, illogical, and downright infuriating decision by a character who was then revealed to be a good guy, someone you should have cheered for, someone who knew what's right all along, is pretty indicative of a bad movie, or at least bad writing, which, let's not even say at least. That would mean it's a bad movie if the writing is terrible. They could have done another plot. They could have written a different story that would get the characters out of the ship. Maybe she has a plan, but she needs Poe and Rose and Finn and whatever to quickly leave the ship in secret and then come back with some necessary thing. Also, there was no growth for these characters, especially Poe.
Also, Holdo explains why she doesn't tell him the plan. She doesn't trust him. He just f***ed up and got demoted. She has no reason to.
That's not even remotely true. And again, her not telling him or anyone else, that's a big thing. It's not just Poe who wasn't told there was a plan. It was literally every other being on that ship who was also intentionally kept in the dark about what she plans to do to escape the First Order. That very fact just takes you out of the movie, and it being the basis for pretty much the rest of the plot. Actually, pretty much everything else in the film more or less follows from that scene, with the exception of Rey's plot. The fact that it's so integral to the film just makes it all the worse. It's not this nitty-gritty little detail, it's the arbiter of whether or not events happen later in the film. Considering how many videos this guy made about The Last Jedi trying to defend him, I would not be in the least surprised if the criticisms toward The Last Jedi and all the people pointing out all the plot holes in the film is the reason why he decided to make this video, as opposed to people pointing out plot holes in general.
Again, if you think this is a plot hole, or you're annoyed because of the logic here, you're kinda watching movies wrong. There's
Oh, fuck off, you self-righteous cunt.
an episode of the show Community that imagined what a horror movie would look like if all the characters only made totally logical decisions.
Should we go check it out?
No. We should call 911 on my fully charged cell phone, lock the doors, and then stand back to back in the middle of the room holding knives.
And the conclusion is that it would be really boring.
I've mentioned Alien before when it comes to characters making logical decisions. And I'll point out that if you want to make a good horror film, if you want to make a horror film that's truly frightening, you need to get not only into the audience's heads when they're in that situation, or if they were in that situation, but also the audience's heads when they're examining the situation from the outside. What's frightening is when you do your best to avoid the danger, but that's not enough. When you're thinking, alright, I know exactly how to escape from this situation if I were in it while sitting in the theater, and then turns out that that plan you had doesn't actually work, and you're like, oh shit, if the killer or the monster or whatever is able to account for this very reasonable course of action that I came up with here, in the safety of viewing the film and not being in with it, I have no idea how the characters are going to be able to get out of it, because I'm out of ideas. This is suspenseful. I'm actually a bit worried for these lads. Are they going to get out? What can they possibly do if not that? So Ripley being smart and going to the escape ship and blowing up the Nostromo, that's something I would think, being in the theater watching it, or at home and watching it, I guess, since it's not in the theater anymore, if I were viewing it for the first time, and say, yep, this is the course of action. Take, this matter is as good as solved. The only worry is maybe when she's running through the corridors, the alien will pop out, but evidently she made it to the escape pod. And I guess we're done for, but oh shit, the alien accounted for that. She's already stripped herself of most of her clothes, she has no weapons on her, and the alien is crawling out of its little hidey hole on the escape ship after the Nostromo has been destroyed. There's nowhere for her to go. What can she do? Again, suspense, even though she made the reasonable choice. Then you have horror films where characters act so stupid that you sitting in your chair would think, even if I were in that exact moment, I wouldn't be doing that. Like in Prometheus, when the biologist is trying to poke around with the snake thing that's hissing at him and whatever, it looks pretty close to an earth cobra. It's hissing, everything about it indicates danger, but he's just trying to fucking touch it like an idiot. That takes you out of the film. That takes you out of the viewing experience. It is an objectively poor bit of writing. Now, if he were smart and avoided it, but the cobra thing still pursued him and attacked, that would be scary. That would show you, you cannot be in this area at all, no matter what, because there is danger here that will attack you, even if you are cautious, even if you are smart. What that clip there is doing isn't making fun of characters for acting smart in horror films. It's making fun of them for acting stupid. It's showing how many deaths could be avoided if characters weren't fucking idiots. If there's a killer in the house and you have two of you, then yeah, stand back to back with some knives and you'd have a better chance of surviving than hearing a thump in a dark room and saying, what's going on in here? And walking inside and getting your head chopped off. That's what it's making fun of, and you completely failed to understand that. Congratulations, no wonder you don't give a shit about writing. You have the analytical abilities of a fucking toddler.
I am in no way telling you to turn your brain off or to not think critically about movies.
That is exactly what you're telling us. Don't fucking lie.
Not at all. I'm saying you should worry about the things that actually matter.
Which evidently internal consistency doesn't. So if in Citizen Kane all of a sudden Foster Kane got Superman powers and flew around the world a bunch and punched Hitler in the dick and then flew back and crashed into the Twin Towers and then exploded into a multitude of porgs, and then the very next scene the movie carried on as if that didn't happen with no explanation for what the fuck you just saw, that wouldn't matter. That would be a pretty severe plot hole showing a major inconsistency in the film's universe based on what was already established. But who fucking cares, right? Who fucking cares if films are able to follow the rules they set up? I wonder if a big part of that was the fact everybody's calling Rey a Mary Sue for not having to train or learn anything, but just automatically acquiring any skill she needs at the moment just from hearing that there's a problem and automatically having the solution. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case.
So, take Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice. I think it's a bad movie, and it has big old dumb logic issues, like why can Superman locate Lois Lane from her heartbeat but can't find his mother the same way? Why doesn't Wonder Woman, who isn't affected by kryptonite, be the one to use the spear against Doomsday?
And those are both good questions, and logical inconsistencies in that film are one of the reasons why people don't like it. It's poorly written.
Those aren't the real problems with the movie. The actual problems are that many of the central characters are totally static and poorly motivated, and they don't learn anything or grow through the story, and the one major moment of growth is caused by a ridiculous plot contrivance.
You simply are not aware that it's possible for a film to be bad due to a multitude of reasons, plot holes being one of them.
So as much as I enjoy making fun of some dumb logic gaps in that movie, they still don't really matter.
The plot holes. Remember the plot holes? So you're trying to tell me the supremacy, Snoke's ship, isn't powerful enough to penetrate the shields?
In episode 2F09, when Ichi plays Scratchy's skeleton like a xylophone, he strikes the same rib twice in succession, yet he produces two clearly different tones.
So you see what he did there? He said like, ahaha, you see those nerds from The Simpsons? That's you. You're a bunch of nerds. You're a bunch of nerds for caring about, like, this minor inconsistency. Even though it's not really a minor inconsistency, a legitimate question. Why isn't the supremacy the flagship of this galaxy-spanning empire that has enough power and resources to make Death Stars out of planets not able to take down a rebel ship due to some rink-eating shields? This is despite the fact that it was able to attack the rebel ship earlier. The TIE fighters or whatever were able to do a significant amount of damage to the rebel ship. So why is there nothing in the First Order's arsenal that would account for it? A much bigger question then, why was there this minor sound error in an Itchy and Scratchy cartoon?
Why is it that in the 80s or 90s or early 2000s, no one really cared about plot holes? They still existed, but no one ever complained a movie was bad because of all the plot holes.
People have complained about bad writing in movies since they were made. They might not have used the term plot holes, but they certainly have pointed it out.
So what happened? Basically, the internet. Because I like driving myself insane, I searched back through Google year by year for references to plot holes. Until about 2007, they only appeared in movie reviews and forum posts. They hadn't gone fully mainstream yet. They hadn't been embraced by the public. But then in 2008, Cracked published the article 8 Classic Movies That Got Away with Gaping Plot Holes. There were more forum posts. Then in 2009, the TV Tropes page for Plot Hole was created. In 2010, it really began. Articles on Wired, The Escapist, Den of Geek, and Kotaku. Plot holes had officially crossed over into mainstream nerd culture. Their rise coincided with the arrival of listicle articles, and plot holes were the perfect clickbait. Nitpicks about popular things that could reveal things readers may have missed. But 2012 was where the change really happened. This was when plot holes started taking over YouTube. Pop culture commentary from a nerdy fan perspective began exploding in popularity. And
I would agree. The internet is a major reason you hear about plot holes. But it's a major reason you hear more about anything. The nature of the internet is anyone with access to it and the means to put their voices out are able to and probably will. So before the internet became big, you heard about plot holes from maybe a professional critic who had a limited amount of time and limited amount of space to voice their opinion. Siskel and Ebert had their show, but that couldn't run on for hours and hours. And the reviewers in newspaper columns or magazines could write about their views of a film, but they didn't have entire novels lengths of pages in order to go over every issue. Or you could have heard about it from your friends who might not be very privy to the terminology concerning film criticism, but they no doubt would have pointed out logical inconsistencies in the films. Now, with the internet, there's no longer a limited time and space. You can make as long a video as you need to point out absolutely everything you need without restrictions. And because information is so readily available and terms are able to spread so quickly, people are more able to learn the term plot hole and understand, oh, that's what it's called. That's what these logical inconsistencies in this film is called. It's called a plot hole. That is a word in the English lexicon that describes this phenomenon. I shall start using it as it is the apt term to describe the problem. So yeah, it's in large part because of the internet, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's just the nature of how the internet works and its impact on society. For better or worse, anyone is able to espouse their views here, and you're going to hear a lot more people give their opinions about movies than you would have before, because you have far more access to these opinions than ever before.
Immediately, the types of videos that proved most popular were humorous analyses of popular movies focusing on surface-level nitpicks.
He's gonna do that stupid cut to the CinemaSins logo multiple times here, which is kind of funny because in his own little retrospective of the use of plot holes online, he pointed to Cracked, the website Cracked, as being the reason that really started to take off and became a big term among movie reviewers or critics online, not CinemaSins. I don't know if CinemaSins even goes out of their way to say plot holes. They just kind of point out logical inconsistencies in movies without explaining what the terminology is, from what I remember. So it's a lot closer to the pre-plot holes days when people didn't know what that term was than it is to what you're talking about.
Over the next several years, these types of videos grew in number and popularity. For many people, especially millennials and whatever the generation after millennials is called,
they're called Zoomers, or Generation Z. But the reason for that is because the internet has exponential growth. More and more people are starting to go online, especially around 2006 onward, and they're going to be posting their own content more and more, especially since content is becoming easier to post because the tools are getting better.
Most film criticism they consume is on YouTube. And not all, but a lot of this is surface-level critique, focusing on nitpicks, and chief among those nitpicks, plot holes. Plot holes don't really mean anything, but
it literally has a definition and is a metric for rating quality.
they're good clickbait, and those videos get views, and they multiply. And people...
You keep showing CinemaSins, but they don't say plot hole, plot hole, plot hole. The titles of their videos is everything wrong with movie title, which could very well just be them talking about the characters, how they grow, how you relate to them, how they progress, you know, the sort of things you think are legitimate criticisms that aren't plot holes. I don't like them either, but the constant callbacks to them, the constant finger pointing at them after every point, just makes you look like a tool. Although I guess we crossed that bridge long ago and burned it to smithereens, now haven't we?
Watch them and believe them and repeat those points in conversation. And when they watch movies, they think about these surface level nitpicks.
I like how he calls them nitpicks. Because, you know, the logical inconsistencies in the film are just nitpicks. What does it matter if the story makes sense? What does it matter if it's written well? You're just nitpicking. You're just nitpicking, and you're watching the film wrong.
They look for them. No one is really to blame for this. Okay, CinemaSins definitely deserves some of the blame. But it's...
Did CinemaSins smack an ice cream cone out of your hand when you were a child? Like, what is it with you and CinemaSins? Get over them, or actually explain why they're to blame. Explain how they're putting in this meme of plot holes into the internet reviewing community's mind, as opposed to just, you know, doing this stupid little skit here.
It's not just them. This is way bigger. This is about cultural shifts coinciding with evolving technology. And look, as long as movies are popular and people on the internet are making videos for clicks, it's going to keep happening. So look, watch whatever YouTube videos you want, think whatever you want about...
This is as opposed to him here, who totally isn't making this video for clicks. There's no way that a title called "Shut Up About Plot Holes" is in any way provocative enough that people might be enticed to click it to see why this dipshit's so angry about plot holes. No, he's a completely honest man who doesn't try to use any tactics aside from the quality of his videos that would get people to view them.
Movies, just please.
And the rest is him shilling for some product I don't give a shit about. What an awful video. Just what a downright awful video from a guy who doesn't understand what good movies are, what makes a good movie, what makes a good story, and seems to have a grudge against quality in general. I don't think it should come as a surprise that I didn't like this video or this guy's opinions, and I really hope that anyone who is making movies doesn't look at this video and say, oh yeah, this is a good point, because it's not. If you're making a story, you're going to be setting up rules about its world. If you're making like a purely down-to-earth, very average story without any fantastic elements like Schindler's List or Citizen Kane or 12 Angry Men, then you can't be having ridiculous sci-fi, fantasy, magic, and spaceships and all that suddenly appear on the screen, because that would be internally inconsistent. Similarly, if you make a story with magical elements in it, there has to be a level of consistency to them as well. Otherwise, the audience is taken out because there's no rules for the film to be grounded in. This is what we call plot holes, internal inconsistencies in films. And they are important to be aware of. You have to be aware of what you're writing and make sure that the beginning, the middle, and the end all line up. Now, it's very much possible to make mistakes when reviewing it. The best films of all time have plot holes. But completely deciding, oh, plot holes don't matter, we don't need to worry about them, as long as our characters act human, which in his opinion means act completely irrational, since humans aren't logical. Evidently, he has never made a logical decision in his life. He has never decided, yeah, maybe I shouldn't touch the scalding hot stove because that'll hurt me. No, he'll just slam his hand right there because he's human, he's logical. Like, I'm someone who likes good movies. I'm what you would call a cinephile. And it's quite unfortunate that so many movies that have come out recently are quite shit. And a big reason for them is plot holes. Plot holes in a good movie, as I've said before, can be overlooked. It wouldn't affect the quality of the film, I wouldn't think, and you'd have to sort of go out of your way to find them because the film was so solidly made that it's very easy to miss. But if a movie is bad, you're going to notice those plot holes very quickly. You're going to notice them, and they're going to further take you out of the film because it tells you the writers didn't give a damn about the quality of the movie. They didn't care, they're too unskilled for this project, and this film should not have been made as it is. And when it's a film that's a part of a franchise you really like the Alien movies, or the Predator movies, or the Star Wars movies, or if it's a film with a promising premise, but a poor execution, that just makes it all the worse. We should not be apologizing for bad movies. We should hold them in disdain and demand better. It's why the Solo film, the Star Wars Han Solo movie, bombed so hard. So many fans of Star Wars were so off-put by the lack of quality in The Last Jedi, they outright didn't see the Han Solo movie because they couldn't expect any quality from a Star Wars film, and that hurt the sales of the movie and had some repercussions for the studio. Let's have more of that. Let's have more people demanding more quality in these films rather than accepting sheer schlock. Otherwise, you'd be like this guy, and all you need are characters acting stupid and maybe a few flashy images on the screen to entice the reptile part of the brain into continuing to watch. And movies as an art form might as well be dead. I am very much glad that the greats of filmmaking did not have this guy's opinion, and I'm glad this guy doesn't have any actual sway over how movies are made. Don't listen to this guy. Demand quality from art. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and that I gave you something to think about or otherwise entertained you. Take care.